Now it's time for us to move on. I hope you had a refreshing break. Now when we move further, first and foremost thing we need to understand, this conference is divided into 4 themes. And one of those themes, ladies and gentlemen, the sub-themes is Startup Dive-In. And this Startup Dive-In, ladies and gentlemen, is going to happen in 2 parts. The first one, obviously, there is going to be a panel discussion. Thereafter, some ideators are going to pitch for their startup ideation. So to start the panel discussion, I request first Dr. Sajji Gopinath, CEO Startup Mission, Kerala, Mr. Project Rao, founder, Amplify, Ms. Hina Raval, Director, Google, and Mr. Sumit Mathur, Global Head of Engineering, Broadcom, to please come and take the seats on the dais. Thank you. While they are settling down, I'll take these couple of minutes to introduce our panelists. Well, they all have immense experience, but I'm sure you want to listen to them ardently. Therefore, I'll keep my introduction very, very brief rather. Dr. Sajji Gopinath, well, he currently heads the Kerala Startup Mission, which is an apex body of the government of Kerala, which supports technical entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem. He has over 17 years as Professor, Dean Academic, and Dean Development, and he has also set up satellite campus at IIM Kochi. And he started his career with Larsen & Toubro and later worked in Oil and Natural Gas Commission, and he also serves in various national boards, academic syndicates, and is also associated with several leading universities in the world. So it's indeed an honor. Next, we have Mr. Project Raut, who is just coming over here. Well, Mr. Project Raut, he himself is an entrepreneur, and he's an entrepreneurship evangelist. That itself speaks. He loves starting up and getting people to start up. And his book, Startup and Fundraising, helps startups understand an investor's perspective, how to invest and do things, and helps them improve the odds of getting funded.
Yeah, let's take a picture.
Mr. Rao, it's a pleasure having you with us. Thank you. Of course, now we have Ms. Hina Raval. She leads the internal tools team with Google Technology and Engineering Group that builds applications and intelligent automation to drive productivity for Googlers. And she is a very passionate person about entrepreneurial growth and helps local startups and even students. And that's a very, very important thing. And she is on the board of Thermasans, which is a patient care startup and contributes to literacy projects. So that goes to show your commitment, madam, and it's an honor to have you with us. Last but not the least, we have Mr. Sumit Mathur, my good friend, Mr. Sumit Mathur. I had the great privilege to be in the same batch with him together for about 1.5 years, and I'm honored to be on the same dais with him too. Sumit is currently, he heads the product development of cybersecurity suite of products for Broadcom's enterprise software division. Has over 25 years of experience in building teams, softwares, scaling across cloud, and all those wonderful architectures. And he has held leadership roles in US across many companies such as CA Technologies, Cisco Systems, and Nortel. And he holds multiple patents to his name. Sumit, it's an honor, sir, to have you, and it's over to you now.
Thank you very much, Srinivas. Eric Ries, who is a bestseller author of a book called The Lean Startup, which is pretty much one of the most popular startup-related books in the world, defines startup as a human institution that is designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So what we're going to do in the next 30 minutes today is engage in a conversation that talks about the challenges and difficulties of uncertain world of startup, and look at opportunities that the function of project management brings to the success of those startups. We have an esteemed panel here, people with a very rich and diverse background, so thank you for all coming here. And I got volunteered to be the moderator because I was the only one who agreed to wear a jacket for a startup conversation on a stage. So let's begin. Oh, by the way, the format is I'm going to ask questions, these guys are going to respond, and hopefully we will leave enough time at the end to open it up for all of you to ask a couple of questions as well. So let's begin. Prajakth, you have been related to startups for a long time. You have founded multiple successful companies. You have advised companies. You have been an investor. So you have seen the journey of startups, various different phases, right? Ideation, prototyping, building a minimal viable product, scale, growth, etc. In your experience, what is the role that a project management function plays in different phases of a startup, and which one is most effective in it?
So I think, Sumit, if you think about it, there are two basic phases of a business, right? The first phase is about discovering what will work, and this is a phase when you're doing a lot of experiments. And the second phase is then replicating at scale what you know or has in-market evidence that this has worked. In the initial phase, when you're trying to do multiple experiments to find out what has worked, I think at that point of time, speed to market is most important. Somehow getting the job done is more important. The Jugadu approach of getting things done. Doing it as quickly as possible rather than as most efficiently as possible is the nature of the game at that point of time. And therefore, to my mind, even if there is a need, the willingness to adopt project management techniques and processes at the initial stages of a startup are rather limited. I think at the later stages of the business, when the business matures slightly more, when you know, okay, I've experimented with maybe different business models, different product configurations, maybe customer segments, different market approaches. And now when the company says that, yes, now is the time to put money and resources behind scaling this particular thing up, I think there's a lot more willingness on the part of the leadership teams to adopt project management techniques.
Cool, thank you. So basically what you're saying is, as a project management function, the later stages of a startup journey is where the function is getting more effective and critical.
And even in the later stages, in companies which may have gone beyond, say, product market fit, as they call it, and saying that now there is a time to scale up, there would be divisions in the company that are still conducting experiments. And those divisions, while they may need project management, may not be as receptive to project management as they should be, because rightly so, the objective there is to identify a set of experiments that can get done, because what you're doing in the early stages of a business or of a division in an established business is validating some hypothesis to build the conviction to put enough resources behind that. And therefore, at that stage, it becomes very, very hard for people to say, okay, let's plan it and detail it out, and then let's make a schedule, and let's see which tools fit in and stuff. Because what you want to say is, look, this is a hypothesis. Let me see if this works. If this works or it didn't work this way, okay, let me try a different approach. Let me try a different pricing. What you're doing is very quickly making adjustments to the hypothesis that you had to come to a set of attributes that say, okay, this combination work, this product, this customer segment, this market, this marketing program, this pricing, and so on and so forth, and this is the way I'm going to project it. Now I can put enough resources behind that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that project management is not relevant at the initial stages as well. It may be relevant, and it may add into the effectiveness to what the first keynote speaker in the morning was talking about, reducing the chances of failure and stuff. But culturally, I think the mindset in those stages is to be more experimentative, agile, jugadu, let's somehow get it done rather than a process-oriented approach. But there's also a difference between, one of the questions that gets asked is, at what stage of a company should somebody at project management level join a startup, if at all? And I think it also depends in the stage of life that you're in. If you're at a position to influence decision-making, and to be able to influence the culture of the organization, that at any stage that would be okay. But if you are in an operating role where you have to just go and deliver a certain amount of efficiency in project management, then I think it will be better to go in for companies that are a little more mature in the journey.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Project. Dr. Saji, you have been involved with Project Management Institute. You are running the startup mission in Kerala. So you have seen kind of both sides of the fences. The data suggests that 9 of the 10 startups fail. 2/3 of the ones that succeed change their plans midway to be successful, right? So what differentiates between a startup that succeeds from the rest is not that their initial plan was good, it's their ability to pivot and change their plans before their resources run out, right? Money and things like that. So in your experience, how is the world of project management evolving or should be evolving to kind of cater to this uncertain world of startups?
You are right. In fact, you have a large percentage of failure. And if you look at top 3 reasons of failure, I think one which you mentioned, like the product market fit. When you are entering in the product, the market fit doesn't happen. The thing is you run out of resources, both technical and even financial resources during the runway. You lose out even after a product get into the market, maybe another competitor who comes with a far better product. But if you look at, these are actually the similar cases when you are working on a project in an uncertain world. Right? If you look at the earlier linear model which we use, waterfall model, we changed it to agile because this is exactly what happened. Because customers used to give the requirements in smaller weights, many times they are not clear. So to that extent, there is a parallelism between what's happening in startups and the newer way of project management. But you can say that we need to look at this from a point of view of using project management in a highly uncertain environment. Because many times project management, we use it to understand the complexities and managing the complexity. The scheduling aspects and all we do, and basically to address the complexity. But as far as startups are concerned, you have more of uncertainty rather than the complexity, and you need a lot of experimentation and learning to be done. So 2 aspects can be looked here. One is use PM tools as a learning thing and then adopt it. The second thing is there are new frameworks which are getting evolved. So for example, Harvard University is actually propagating one of the framework called Diamond Framework, which is primarily used in high-tech projects, because high-tech projects and high R&D projects have got a high level of uncertainty. So they look at 4 dimensions in that. They look at the novelty dimension. They look at what type of technology which is being used, whether it's a low-tech or whether it's a very high-tech. What is the complexity involved? Is it just an assembly sort of a model where you are looking at a simple product but not very difficult, or is it a very systemic sort of a thing which you look at? And also the pace, because one big challenge of a startup today is that how fast they get into the market, because the window of opportunity is not very large. By that time you need to get it. So if the pace is very high, you have a different model to look at. So what this Diamond Framework helps you is identify a particular startup model, put it on that framework. It will tell you whether your existing capabilities, what is the gap, and then create solutions or strategies for that. And there sometimes PM tools can be used. You can also use other strategies. You can use a culture of the organization, especially when you are looking at delivering fast. You know, you need to have a different type of a culture for the organization. All these things can actually be derived from that. So just like Agile came into the PMBOK recently, I believe that over the years, some of this new framework also will come. And I think the morning when PM in the transition has been discussed, this is a point which has actually been highlighted also.
Cool.
Can I just clarify?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'll just take a minute to clarify on this myth about 9 out of 10 startups failing. And I think it's a myth that has been propagated in the startup world, because it is not that the failure rates are high. Our definition of startups in the country today, unfortunately, is a very venture capitalist defined version of startups. Now, any legitimate business that can make money need not necessarily make money for investors. And when we say that 9 out of 10 startups fail, what we mean is that in 9 out of 10 startups, the investors do not make money. However, it is not that 9 out of 10 startups that startup actually shut down. They may continue to run as profitable businesses. They may be businesses in which the entrepreneurs are okay with. But unfortunately, the investors have not ended up making money out of that. And I think it's important to sort of calibrate that understanding of failure rates.
So very good point. Very good point. So by the way, some trivia facts. Some of the famous companies that we know of today changed their plans midway. Like Twitter didn't start as a microblogging site, started as a podcast site. Lyft, which is a competitor to Uber in North America, started as a carpooling website and now became a taxi aggregator. Slack, which is a collaborating messaging tool, started as a gaming venture. So the change of plans is not necessarily bad. And I think that's the point that you are making as well. All right, Hina, so you have worked on some cool technologies in Microsoft and now in Google. And there's this word called intrapreneurship, right? Which is act of being an entrepreneur inside a large organization like a Microsoft or a Google. And I'm also reminded of this quote from Michael Dell, which said, ideas are dime a dozen, they are commodity. It is the execution that matters, right? So in your experience, how is the execution different when you are executing a traditional services project versus a product that is going out 5th or 6th release versus something new that you are uncertain of its future? How is execution different?
Right, so and first of all, right, when I'm in the company of folks who are in the startup, I always feel like I've been less courageous. And so I've always decided, on days I like to think I have been wise, there are those days as well. So I have sort of told myself, I'm going to coach startups or help mentor rather than be there. And then what I did was in large corporations that I've been part of, whether it was GE, Microsoft, or now Google, I have decided that I'm going to be an entrepreneur rather than be an entrepreneur outside. Anyway, so when we think about all these large organizations, right, if you're talking about a product or a service which has been in existence for some time, it's very polar opposite almost to what you expect happens in a startup, right? For products which have been in existence, very mature, you know the market very well, you know what your customers are expecting next. There's a very standard expected process and structure that follows. And so PMs there really thrive, they know what to do, they are not struggling. At least that's been my experience. Now, in projects where I have done things from scratch, it's really entrepreneurship in terms of you are testing out a concept, you are building your hypothesis, you've decided to research and validate, you're building your MVP, you're in that phase. What I've seen, at least in large organizations and where PMs have a way of running if they are not ready to sort of unlearn some of their methods, there is a bit of a struggle because the team wants to move fast, and sometimes the processes and the structures are coming in the way of being lean, being able to quickly validate something. So there are really 2-3 things, right? Can we look at the structure and processes from the way of, does this accrue to the end result, to the value we want to create, or to the validation we want to do, whatever the case might be, depending on the stage we are in. So if PMs can focus on that aspect, is this adding to the value? Will I collect data and signals which is going to tell me, am I on the right track? So PMs need to doubly focus on that. The engineers are going to be so excited about the nice prototype that they are building. So PMs want to be that, want to apply that lens of, are we collecting data which will help us know, are we failing, are we progressing in the right direction, do we course correct from here, repivot, whatever, right? So that's one big important aspect. One of the other thing that I've seen is in large organizations especially, and we have very deterministic culture. Even as engineering teams and otherwise, there's an input, we expect a certain output. And most of these new ideas, you want to be prepared to expect anything and everything because you're experimenting, you're exploring. You are not going to, yes, you know where you want to get to, but you don't know exactly the next step that you're taking is going to lead you there, or you need to think differently. And so it's so important for the team as such to have that probabilistic mindset, to be open to see what else they're collecting in the process. Also educating the leadership, because a lot of times our traditional methods have been input, some process, some output. So you want to make sure that you're educating the ecosystem that while we are working on this new idea, new concept, let's be prepared to see something completely different, including be prepared to fail. Manish was talking about there were few slides in his presentation where he was talking about ideas that didn't even go through. So I think those two are very important aspects. So PMs do definitely play a role in, because they are cross-cutting most of the times, across functions, they are communicating to leadership. How do they create that awareness and education of be prepared to focus on unexpected. Unexpected can happen. Also breaking it down to really a small chunk. I have seen that if we have milestones which don't allow us to quickly course correct, if we are going too far into the process, there's more rejection when something does not go as expected. And so you want to break it down to that modular level where your learnings can apply, you can apply those learnings very quickly to course correct. So I've seen those things important from a PM perspective.
So I heard experimentation, I heard fail fast, I heard culture and awareness for the leadership team, right? Right, cool. Thank you. All right, so this one is for all of you. If I'm a practicing project manager sitting in the audience today, what advice would you give me? What skills should I be focused to learn? And in the same tone, what should I be unlearning to be successful in a startup career? Anyone can start?
I can go first. Like, let's say if you were applying for a PM role at Google. I think as much as, because we focus so much on the competency and the skill we have, it's going to be natural that you're going to talk about the processes, the structure, what kind of things you've applied to make sure risks were managed well, dependencies were managed well, and all of that. I feel like if you're sitting in the audience and you're right now thinking, I'm going for an interview to a company like this, you want to really focus on outcome and value that you created as part of the projects that you were leading, you were contributing to, and you want to talk about those insights and learnings that you derived as part of that project execution. I think it is valued so much more that you don't get too caught up with the process and the structure and the methods, rather than you're constantly focused and pivoted on the end outcome for the user, for the customer. And as a PM, if you talk that language and if you're explaining the value that got created, the challenges that came, and of course the insights and the learnings you derived through those challenges or through that opportunity will be very valuable to think about. Don't get too bogged down by the process and the structure.
So can I summarize this like, use process as a means to an end and not the end itself?
Absolutely, absolutely. Process as a proxy.
I think conventionally when you look at a project, we look at an end as such. You are basically looking at project manager's role is just to deliver a project. Now in this new world, you need to actually look at much, much beyond that. You are actually moving from a project management to a project leadership role, because you are basically looking at a long-term customer value, and many of the products which are successful today have all come up in that sort of a mindset. So that mindset change is something which is important. And as the startup matures, the classical project management elements becomes very important, because you need that time the discipline, and you need to actually start looking at how do you focus.
So focus from project management to project leadership.
Yeah, I think one of the important things for people who come from large organizations into a startup, and not necessarily only from the project management part, although more important in the project management side as well, but anybody who comes from a large organization into a startup has to first recognize that a startup is not a smaller version of a large company. I think culturally they are extremely different, and therefore to assume that if this is the most efficient way of doing project management, why don't these guys get it? And let me just go and tell them the process, that won't work. I think there is some level of evangelizing that will happen, that will need to be done to sensitize not just the leadership team, maybe even the leadership team in some cases, but the rest of the organization in terms of saying that why adopting this and getting used to something which is a little more process oriented is important, because otherwise the whole, the culture, and rightly, wrongly, but sort of fostered around in the entire thing is, hey, being a startup is cool, being, sort of not rigid on processes, etc. is cool and stuff like that. And while culturally there may be some benefits of being agile, cool and stuff, I think there is merit in at some point of time when the startup starts progressing at higher levels to get into a more process-driven approach and stuff. And therefore, the role of a project manager would be, or somebody who comes in to drive the project management process in the startup, should be also about evangelizing the whole concept of project management and explaining to the people why this is a better way of doing it for the overall larger good of the company.
So focus on the larger good of the organization and carry that message in your day-to-day interactions with the larger
basically just coming with the mindset saying that this is not a smaller version of a large company. It won't function at a smaller level with all the same dynamics that existed there.
It's a different version. It's a different thing. Okay, cool.
So what I've also seen is that most of us start with a problem statement. It has been given or whatever, and especially when you are in a project management role, you obviously start with some problem which is defined. I think project managers, program leaders of today will need to constantly look for the data, collect the data and say, are we solving the right problem or should we refine the problem? And they will get the signals through the initial validation and the experiments and the exploration that they're doing. So I think PMs of today are in such great positions to refine the problems, because we don't fail because we didn't know how to solve a problem. We fail because we solved a wrong problem. Or we didn't create the value that we had initially thought will create the value for our users. And so refining the problem with your observations, supported by data that you're collecting from your users, from your services that you're providing to your users, so important. And typically, we are so much in the rush of solving the problem that we miss the opportunity of refining the problem. And I feel like that's such an important aspect. So that should be something.
That's so true, right? They say, love the problem, not the solution. Absolutely. So to something the project you mentioned that piqued my interest, most or many project managers have this perception that project management as a function is technology or domain agnostic, right? But in the startup world, right, you have healthcare startups, you have cybersecurity startups, you have fintech. How relevant is, for me, if I'm looking for a startup as a practicing project manager, to know the domain that I'm getting into?
I think it depends in terms of what you're getting into. I mean, say for example, if somebody's building a biomedical device and it is about, the entire project is about getting the MVP and then the prototype and the final product ready. If that is the task of making more efficient that you've been hired for, then obviously if you come from the finance and banking industry with no understanding of either manufacturing or biomedical devices, is going to be in hindrance. But it also depends in terms of what role you are going in for. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody who sold Pepsi could come and run Apple as well. But when you're in a leadership position, defining the direction in which the project is going, you may be able to be sector agnostic. But when you're coming into a functional role to do operations, I think having some domain expertise, especially if you're coming in for developing a product that is relevant to the domain, is going to be more important.
Cool. Dr. Saji?
I also think that there is the level of uncertainty in these domains are also very different. Say, for example, take a biotech, for example, the runway which is very, very long compared to maybe an e-com or something like that. And you also type of resources which is available, etc., are different. So if a project manager from a different domain joins, they should have an understanding about not necessarily the nuances of the domain, but the broader strategic challenges each domain presents. That has to have an understanding, because the way you curate your project management methodologies will depend upon what type of startup you are getting into.
Just elaborate on the example. If it's e-commerce, a lot of times we see what we see on the front end. So if I'm a project manager, say from the banking or the software industry, and I don't know a thing about e-commerce, and I don't know the robotics about warehousing, automation, supply chain, logistics, and stuff like that, I may not be able to contribute as much to the entire optimization process as it is.
Absolutely.
For me, I think I have seen more success, and again, I have the liberty, being in large organization, I have the liberty of saying that the team composition and the size and is different. Of course, I understand for startups that'll be a big constraint, but I've seen composition, team composition, which is a mix of deeper domain experts along with people who are from other functional areas or other expertise works out much better, because at the end of the day, you want, whether you are an expert in a domain or not, you want to be curious all the time, and you want to make sure that you're making observations and you're asking right questions and all of that. But I've seen composition of a mixed team is always sort of better, because people coming from outside of the domain tend to ask some very simple questions at times, and that might be like the light bulb moment for the teams who have been working in that domain for a really, really long time. So it helps, but yeah.
Cool. Thank you. We have almost 4 minutes left. I'd like to open it up to the audience and see if you have any questions from the audience for the panel. I think we have mics on the floor. Sir.
Hello. Well, I have a question for Project Raut, since you're an evangelist. We have been hearing about startups for the last 5 years, right? So what is the future of startup? Where do we go from here? I mean, do you remain a startup? And if you, so for how long?
So I think, we used to, startups is a definition that has come into being since venture capital started becoming available for early stage companies. But entrepreneurship has been the forefront of job creation and in the economy in India in any case. Earlier you used to call them businessmen, earlier used to call them traders, this, that, whatever. But there were hundreds and thousands of businesses that were getting created. What has happened as a result of venture capital firms coming up is that the definition of scale and the speed at which scale happens has changed, because there's a lot more capital that is available to scale that up. But if you take, outside of the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 companies that get funded, there are hundreds of thousands of businesses that get done, that get created. For some reason, media and us don't tend to call them startups. In my view, any legitimate business that an entrepreneur feels comfortable doing, or anybody who's self-employed feels happy doing to whatever his or her extent, should be called a startup. If I'm making handmade shoes tomorrow, if I'm making handmade furniture, and if I'm happy making a couple of lakhs every month as a profit, so be it. I'm an entrepreneur, and that's a startup as well. Now, coming to the regular definition of startups and VC funds and coming in, I think media tends to report in extremes. They either report in people getting hundreds of millions or people, companies shutting down. But as in life, the reality is always in the middle, and there's a lot of companies that are doing extremely good work. They're doing, a lot of very innovative things, funded or otherwise, they're doing fairly well. They may not be successful to the extent that they will get covered in the eco times as well. But if you look at, most of the places, forget Bangalore, Bombay, Gurgaon, Hyderabad, and the places like that. Even if you go to places like Jabalpur, Bhopal, Indore, Madurai, Coimbatore, there's a lot of people who are looking at entrepreneurship as a career option. By the way, if you think about it, jobs as a career or jobs as a way of working is in human history is no more than 250 to 300 years old after the Industrial Revolution. Before that, it was self-employment, and self-employment is nothing but entrepreneurship.
Thank you. Sir.
So my question is that if you are a successful project manager, then what's the possibility to become a successful entrepreneur? You got my question? No.
Yes. Who's want to try first?
What are the chances of becoming a successful entrepreneur? If you are
So if you are a successful project manager, then what are the chances to become a successful entrepreneur?
if you have a problem if you see a problem that you are very passionate about solving, I think it starts there for me. And again, there are wiser people here who can answer this better, but I'm a successful project manager. I'm thinking, how can I be a successful entrepreneur? I'm going to think, is there a problem that I'm very passionate about solving? I feel like that is going to impact millions of users billion of users? Do I want to
It could be vice versa. Means if you are a successful entrepreneur, then what's the possibility to become a good project manager in the later stages?
Yeah, once the initial validation, chaos, the stage of validating and proving the concept is done, I think I need to get to a stage where I start thinking about scaling my product or service or whatever value I'm creating. And at that point, a structure, a method, the processes are needed. So if I am a successful entrepreneur, I have tested my product with 1,000 users, and now I want to get to that, what should I do for my next million users or whatever? I have to sit down and start thinking about my strategies. So I will have to start thinking in terms of the tools and techniques that project managers will apply.
Unfortunately, we have been signaled the time is up. The panel is going to be on the floor. You can interact with them and ask them questions during the networking break. Thank you, Dr. Saji. Thank you, Hina. Thank you, Project. Thank you very much.
To kindly stay for a few minutes for a little felicitation. That was wonderful. Ladies and please be seated until somebody comes out. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, the questions have been, which is first, chicken or egg? Yeah? It's debatable. It depends, is what the panelists have told us. It's never either or. It could be and too, right? So remember all the logical mathematics that you have done. The ors, ands, and probably the nands and everything. Ultimately, as they said, it's the passion and it's the commitment. That's what drives. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to our panelists. And may I call upon Mr. Shyam Bhaskar, President, PMI Pune chapter, to kindly come and felicitate our panelists. There we go. We have Mr. Shyam Bhaskar out there. First, to our moderator, Mr. Sumit Mathur. Next, to Ms. Rao. Thank you very much to each and every one of you.